Welcome back to The Critique. Today we are looking at a really ambitious piece of writing.
Yeah, this one is. It's out there, in a good way.
It's a synthesis of Dr. Michael Guillen's theory, essentially arguing that the cosmic horizon—
That point, what is it, 273 billion trillion miles away where galaxies are just gone, moving at the speed of light.
Exactly. The argument is that this point is the physical, actual location of the biblical heaven.
It is a wild concept. You're taking high-energy astrophysics and just smashing it right into ancient theology.
Right. And the listener who sent this in has done a ton of heavy lifting. I mean, they've mapped out the variables, the expansion rates, the light speed limit.
And the theological descriptions of a hidden, inaccessible kingdom. It's all there.
It is. But, looking at the draft, I think the biggest challenge here isn't the science itself. It's how that science is being wielded to make the point.
Right, because reading through it, there's this palpable excitement. It feels like the writer is shouting, "Look, we found it. It's right there on the map."
And that enthusiasm is great, but it's actually leading to the first major hurdle in the text.
Okay.
There's a fascinating parallel being drawn between the cosmic horizon and the spiritual realm, but the argument pushes it too far.
How so?
It risks conflating a physical limitation, our inability to see past that horizon, with, definitive proof of a specific metaphysical location.
I caught that too. It reads a bit like, since we can't physically go past this point, that must be where the spirits live. But honestly, is that really a problem? If the goal is to convince people, don't you want to sound certain?
You do want to sound confident, but you don't want to sound brittle.
Brittle, okay.
The issue is that for a reader who knows the science, and we have to assume this audience does, this setup feels like a classic God of the gaps argument.
Ah, right.
You find a boundary in science, a gap in our reach, and you immediately plug it with a theological explanation. The problem is, if science eventually pushes that boundary back,
your theology collapsed.
Exactly. So by claiming it's proof, you're actually making the argument more fragile.
I see.
If I'm a skeptic reading this, and you tell me science confirms heaven is at the cosmic horizon, my immediate reaction is, no, science confirms that light can't reach us from there. The gap between those two statements is just too wide.
Okay, so how do we fix that? Because the parallel is cool. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here.
We absolutely keep the parallel, but we change the framing. We need to shift from confirmation to, say, resonance.
Resonance. I like that. It sounds less aggressive.
It's more inviting. Instead of saying science proves the location, we frame it as science providing a conceptual vocabulary that aligns with the theology.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about rewriting that opening. Instead of asserting science confirms heaven is there, try something like, the physical characteristics of the cosmic horizon offer a modern model for understanding the ancient concept of a forbidden, invisible realm.
That lands differently. You're not telling me what to believe, you're giving me a lens to look through.
Exactly. You're inviting the reader to view the data through a theological lens, rather than insisting the data is theological. You could even be more specific.
How?
Acknowledge that Einstein's relativity forbids matter from crossing that barrier. But then you explicitly state that the leap to this is where heaven starts is a philosophical interpretation of that physics.
So you're showing your work. You're saying, here's the hard math, and here's the philosophical step I'm taking.
Yes, it respects the reader's intelligence. It allows them to say, wow, that's a beautiful analogy, instead of forcing them to say, wait, that's not how evidence works.
That actually bleeds right into the next big hurdle in the text, which is the concept of time itself.
Oh, the timelessness section?
Yeah.
This is a high-impact concept. But man, it is tricky to write about without messing up the physics.
Well, the manuscript says, quite literally, time simply ceases to exist at the horizon.
Right.
And then it equates that directly to biblical eternity. Now, on a poetic level, that's fantastic. But physically, does time actually stop?
Well, that's the rub. In general relativity, time dilation is entirely relative to the observer.
Right.
If you were actually riding a photon at the horizon, your experience is one thing. But for us, watching from Earth, it's completely different. The current draft simplifies this so much that a scientifically literate reader might just check out.
They'd think the author doesn't understand the observer effect.
Exactly. Because to an object out there, time is still ticking away, isn't it? It's only from our perspective that they look frozen.
It is. But here's the cool part. You can use that correction to actually make the theological point stronger.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you admit that time stops from our perspective, you're highlighting the separation. You're essentially saying that we on Earth are trapped in our own bubble of causality. So the nuance actually enhances the otherworldly vibe.
It really does. We look at the horizon and we see the limit of our reality. The timelessness isn't just a magic trick. It's a matter of observational limits.
So for the rewrite, you'd suggest being very explicit about the observer effect?
Definitely. Don't just say time stops. Say something like, from the human perspective, bound to Earth, time at that distance appears frozen.
It puts the limitation on us, not on the universe.
Correct. And that aligns perfectly with the theology. We are the ones trapped in the flow of time. The divine is what exists outside of it.
I'm thinking about how to phrase that. The text mentions no past or future, but physically, the horizon is expanding, so it's dynamic. How do you square that?
You distinguish between the mechanism and the concept. You could write something like, the cosmic horizon acts as a temporal seal.
A temporal seal. That's good.
It isolates our chronological existence from whatever lies beyond, effectively mirroring the separation between the temporal and the eternal.
That acknowledges the physics that we are cut off, without making a false claim that time physically vanishes.
It turns a potential scientific error into a philosophical strength.
And that brings us to what I think is the most speculative part of the whole piece.
The light entities.
Yeah, this is where we go from Einstein to angels really, really fast.
It is a bold leap. The text basically argues matter cannot travel at the speed of light. Therefore, the space beyond the horizon is populated by non-physical entities.
It feels a bit like a non sequitur, doesn't it?
A little. It's like saying cars can't drive on the ocean, therefore the ocean is full of ghosts. Right. I mean, maybe it is full of ghosts, but it's probably just full of water that we can't drive on.
Exactly. And my worry is that a reader is going to stop right there. They're going to say, or it's just more empty space, or more galaxies that are moving away from us too fast to see.
That's the danger. Ignoring the boring physical possibilities makes the exciting spiritual conclusion feel totally unearned.
So we need to introduce what you call a constructive counterargument.
You do. You have to anticipate the skepticism.
You mean admit that it might not be angels?
Yes, you have to validate the reader's doubt. If you do that, you build trust. Then when you offer your speculation, the more willing to follow you.
So how do you write that without just destroying the argument?
You frame it as a possibility invited by the physics, rather than a certainty proved by it. Start by acknowledging the alternative.
Okay.
You could say, while we cannot know what lies beyond, it could simply be more unobservable universe. The physics offers a tantalizing constraint.
And what's the constraint?
The constraint is mass. We know for a fact that matter as we know it cannot exist at that velocity barrier. Only massless particles, energy, photons, can exist there.
I see where you're going. You pivot from it is angels to physics only leaves the door open for things like angels.
Exactly. You focus on the exclusion of matter. Here's a way to draft that. Since the laws of relativity dictate that only massless particles like photons can exist at this velocity, the realm beyond the horizon is, by definition, a realm of light and energy.
That is scientifically accurate.
And then you land the plane. This physical constraint poetically mirrors the biblical description of spiritual beings composed of light. It suggests a realm where the heavy burden of matter cannot enter.
That is beautiful and much harder to argue with.
Right? You aren't saying Einstein proved angels. You're saying Einstein's rules create a room that looks exactly like the one described in the Bible.
It's subtle, but it makes the argument persuasive rather than conspiratorial.
It creates that bridge without burning down the science. Now, speaking of bridges, we need to talk about the antiquity argument.
This was the part about the horizon being the beginning.
Right. This is the brain twister. The text claims the horizon contains the oldest objects and implies that stepping beyond it puts you before the universe.
This is where I got a little tangled up.
Because looking out into space is looking back in time. That's standard cosmology.
It is.
But the text seems to confuse the edge of space with the moment of creation.
It definitely blurs the line between distance and time, and that's a problem because the cosmic horizon is a spatial limit. It's a distance. The Big Bang is a temporal event. It's a time. If you conflate them, you just confuse the reader.
Because if I could magically step over the horizon right now, I wouldn't necessarily be in the past, would I? I'd just be very, very far away.
Theoretically, yes. but visually, you are looking at the past. The suggestion here is to untangle the where from the when, so the metaphor lands.
Okay, so how?
You need to clarify that because light takes time to travel, the cosmic horizon is a snapshot of the early universe. It is the baby picture of the cosmos.
Right, we established that looking at the horizon is looking at the beginning.
Yes. And then you distinguish the singularity, time zero, from the horizon. You can make the point that the horizon represents the threshold of a pre-creation state.
I like that term, pre-creation.
It does a lot of work. You might write something like, just as the horizon represents the limit of our visual past, Gillen suggests it represents the threshold of a state that exists outside the timeline of the created universe.
That helps. It aligns the Ancient of Days theology with the ancient universe of physics.
Exactly. You're using the vast age of the light to draw a parallel to the eternal nature of God, without getting bogged down in the mechanics of whether there's just more empty vacuum behind the curtain.
It seems like the common thread in all this feedback is, it's about tone. We're moving from conquering the truth to exploring the connection.
That is the overarching theme. The current tone is very declarative. It's triumphant. We won. The Bible is true. And look, I get it. It's exciting.
But that tone puts people on the defensive. It makes the skeptic want to fight you.
Right. And you want the skeptic to sit down and listen. So the suggestion is to modulate that voice. Be more contemplative. Instead of Dr. Gillen proves, try Dr. Gillen's framework invites us to reconsider.
It invites collaboration.
It does. Which finally brings us to the conclusion. The so what currently stops at it's real.
Which is a big claim, sure, but is that enough?
I don't think so. I think the piece would benefit hugely from expanding on why this synthesis matters. Why do we care if the horizon is heaven?
Is it about the unification of knowledge? Like science and faith aren't at war?
I think it is. It's about the idea that we don't have to choose between our telescopes and our texts. A really strong closing argument would suggest that these two things are telling the same story, just in different languages.
I love that Rosetta Stone idea we touched on in the notes.
Let's workshop that into a final sentence for the listener. You want to leave them thinking. Maybe something like, ultimately, Gasolin's theory suggests that the cosmic horizon is not just a wall, but a Rosetta Stone.
Translating the equations of relativity into the language of the divine. Yeah, that gives me chills.
It challenges the reader to stop seeing science and faith as enemies and start seeing them as two maps describing the same territory.
That elevates the whole piece from a gotcha moment to a moment of genuine insight. It really does. It transforms it from a debate tactic into a philosophy.
So to recap for our listener, you have the bones of a fantastic argument here. The source material is bold and imaginative, but to make it robust, you have to soften the proof and harden the logic.
Right, we're swapping confirmation for resonant. We're fixing the time stops error by using the observer effect to our advantage.
We're acknowledging that light entities is a speculation, but one that fits the physical constraints of the universe. And we are carefully distinguishing between looking far away and looking back in time.
If you can make those tweaks, refine those definitions, and calm down that triumphant tone, this could be a really, really powerful piece of writing.
Absolutely. So we want you to make these changes. Play with that phrasing we discussed. Validate the skeptic so you can win them over. And then please send it back to us. We'd love to see the next draft.
Seriously, send it back. I want to read the version where the physics is airtight.
That's it for this critique. Now get to writing.